inside the other in different directions. You're supposed to look down and not look at anyone else, not say anything to anyone. And if you did, you would be punished severely. And then, of course, they allowed them to have use of the bathrooms. And then they would go to work for long shifts. LAIZER was used to the jail by this time. As brutal as it was, he was determined to survive, and he had his wits about him. Others, who were less determined to keep their Yiddishkeit, did not survive past a year or two. 90 to 95% of the prisoners would die within the first 2 years. LAIZER would observe what's going on around him, but he wasn't allowed to even look at them. But through the corner of his eye, he saw. And one day he saw something that attracted his attention. A young man, barely a teenager, was walking in the inner circle with eyes sunken, and he appeared to be crying to himself. The eyes were sunken. The young man was hunched over. He looked defeated spiritually. He observed him from day to day and saw that each day the young man looked worse and worse. Reb LAIZER knew that he was not a Jew, but he was determined to help that young man survive. What could he do? He couldn't talk to him, could not encourage him. Taking his life in his own hands, LAIZER would get packages from his wife occasionally with some small kosher items so that he could survive for times like Pesach, where there was nothing else to eat. His wife would send him packets of sugar in case the matzah she sent him wouldn't get there. Often they didn't. For various reasons, the wardens would take them away, eat them themselves, not give them until after Passover. You know the story. So all he had often to eat for Passover was 1 or 2 packets of sugar a day, maybe 3. He collected those packets that she sent, kept them in a secret place. Well, this young man needed something, so he took a packet of sugar. That was the only thing he could hide. He hid it in his hands, and as he walked past the young man, he just gently put it into the young man's hand. The young man did not make notice, just kept it, and then brought it to his cell, apparently. The next day, the same thing happened. This went on for a month or 2. And after 2 months, the young man was gone. But Reb LAIZER saw that his sunken eyes were no longer sunken. He was no longer crying. Apparently, the fact that there was a human being who cared about him touched his very core, and the young man was confident and stood up straight from that time on and took on everything that went his way. But as I said, a couple of months later he was gone. And Reb LAIZER continued in that bitter lager, in those lagers in Siberia. During his later times, they took him to a lager, a camp in Siberia that was so cold and so removed that there were no fences there because you had nowhere to go. Because if you ran out, it was so cold and frigid that you would freeze to death. There were no villages, cities, nothing around. And one day, the jailers decided that they were going to move the camp 20 miles away. They weren't going to take trucks for that purpose. They would force the inmates to walk. LAIZER had caught a cold. He had about 104-degree temperature. I think he said he had 40 degrees Celsius. And it was 104. And he couldn't get up. They told him to get up, put his coat on. They were going to move. Put his coat on, walked with the rest of the group for about 100 yards and collapsed into the snow. The guard told him, get up. He said, I can't. And usually, when you're facing the guard has to shoot you if you can't go, because he has a roster. And if someone is missing, that means that he's escaped. Never mind that he's in snow and he probably froze to death. According to protocol, unless you shot him dead, he has escaped, and you get punished. So every guard who had a prisoner who could not walk had to execute the prisoner right there. LAIZER knew this. Most prisoners would turn around. They didn't want to face their executioner. But LAIZER said he had this blessing from the REBBE. He knew something had to happen. He didn't know what would happen. Get up or I'll shoot you. He says, I can't move. I'm sick. What do you want? Get up or I'll shoot you. I can't move. The guard, frustrated, seeing that the gun wouldn't work, had a dog with him. A brutal dog. The dog was held on a leash very close to him because the dog was taught to attack. The guard unraveled several windings of the leash and told the dog, go get him! In Russian, of course. And the dog jumped. A huge dog jumped on LAIZER, and the mouth and the tongue and the teeth were visible to his eyes, and he was going to bite out his face. And the fright, he was frightened from this much more than from a gun. And at that moment, just as the dog was ready to put his teeth into his nose and mouth, tear his face to pieces, he pulled the dog back. The adrenaline in LAIZER's body got him up, it shook him up, and he walked to the beginning of the line. He was the first one there after 20 miles. So he owes the man a thank you. He goes over to the guard and he says, thank you for what you did. Instead of killing me, you saved my life. The guard looked at him. He says, don't you recognize me? He looked again. This was the young man whom he had given the sugar packets to. He says, what's your name? Who are you? And he told him he had been arrested as a boy of 18. His parents were dead. He had no one else in the world. And there was nobody who knew where he was or cared. And he thought for sure he would die there. But when you gave me that sugar, I saw that there was some person who cared. And they gave me hope. And I was determined to survive because of that. And after a couple of months, they transferred me and a short while later released me. I had no place to go, so I took a job as a guard. But I always remembered you. And I swore that one day I would return the favor. There is light in darkness. But you have to seek it out. And when you seek it out, not only is there light in the darkness, but the darkness itself can shine.